we are going to see the film A Breath Made Visible, directed by Rudy Gerber, and it's about life and work of American choreographer and dance practitioner Anna Halprin. And before that, we are very fortunate to have Vala T with us. She's performance artist, queer witch, shapeshifter, researcher, founder and curator of Lamella, the House of Queer Arts in Poland. She graduated from Shahar Artness Home and School for Movement in Israel and Performance House in Silkeborg, Denmark. Currently, she's enrolled at the program Master of Fine Arts in Artistic Research at Malmo Art Academy in Sweden. She fled to Denmark in 2019 due to political changes in her home country, Poland. She lived in San Francisco area for a couple of years between 2011 and 2017, working with local artists and attended Anna Halprin's trainings. And of course, because she has worked with Anna Halprin, we are going to talk with her about this very, very important and interesting American artist. You will see in the film the whole kind of retrospect on her life and work. She's 100 years old this year. She had her 100th birthday. I think one could say that it's hard to find more influential dancer, choreographer, and dance practitioner, more kind of influential figure for the dance that developed after 1950s in United States. She, I think, slowly became more and more present and visible internationally. She's a very unique artist that kind of introduced dance practice that stepped from the realm of artistic product or dance that was well composed, which the dance which we usually connect with performances. I think what you're going to see in the film, she introduced the different approach to dance practice, and this is what we are going to talk about today with Vala. I would ask Vala, the first question would be, how did you became aware of Anna Halprin's work, and basically what was your door into her work, and at what point of your working life that happened?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you right now. Unfortunately, not with my physical presence in Ljubljana, which is one of my favorite cities where I also used to live. Thank you for the invitation to the festival, and thanks for the question, Rok. Yeah, coming, to a certain understanding of a dance history when I was studying back in Poland at the university, at the Jagiellonian University, I took a course in American avant-garde of dance history back then. And this is where I basically became aware of Anna as an artist and also as a pioneer of postmodern dance, as she is classified by the dance history, basically. And I was very much inspired by the course and has started to research what she was actually doing throughout this century. sometime later, it happened that I was actually invited by a dance company to work in San Francisco by a Canadian choreographer, Isabelle Kerouac, who invited me to come over and work with the performance over there. In the same time, you know, this was very close. This was north from San Francisco, where we had our practice. And this is exactly where Anna Halprin has her studio and where she is teaching and also having performances. And at some point when I was living out there in California, I was basically extremely interested to meet her in person, attend her classes, and see her performances. I think one can say that it's quite unusual to meet in person a legend of postmodern dance, a person who is still alive, a person who is still teaching, and is quite an amazing, radical female figure in the history of dance. I had an amazing chance to actually witness the performance she choreographed with a couple of dancers she was working with, that was based on erotic sketches by her husband, Lawrence, who was sending her sketches from his from the time when he was serving for American Navy in the 40s. And when he passed away, which was a big loss for her, because they not only shared a life and a family, but also they shared an artistic practice for over a century, right? So she designed this amazing score. As she's also using this term, it's rather scoring than choreographing. And that performance was really amazing, was very poetic, was very touching. And that's how I encountered Anna.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell a little bit? She was working with Lawrence Halprin, who is one of the most renowned landscape architects. What could you say about this? This is, I think, also in her bio, very important step, because she moved from New York to San Francisco. Could you tell us a little bit about, you know, like the whole landscape of this studio that she has there? Or share
Yes.
a little bit
Yes. Of
a
course,
little bit experience about this.
you cannot ignore the fact that Anna lives in the middle of the woods in the northern part of San Francisco area, which was basically designed by Lawrence. The whole, you know, the house and the dance deck and the dance studio, which became such an iconic image, not only for a dance environment, but also in the understanding of what Lawrence was researching as an artist, since he and Anna both shared a Jewish heritage. And Lawrence was very much drawn into these collective notions of architecture, the notion of how the environment influences the human activities. Lawrence was also for a while working in Israel, where he was closely looking at this whole idea of the kibbutz, which I think was strongly influenced on what they were afterwards creating at the dance deck. You know, it's a stunning landscape where you have a dance deck among, you know, redwood trees with amazing view for the Tamalpa mountains. And you have an immediate access to the nature, which became a fundament also for Anna's work on how the human body is connected to the nature, to the environment. It was also amazing to actually experience dancing there with Anna, studying with her, taking classes, and experience her teaching. And also I had an amazing pleasure to actually sleep over in that studio a few times, since she was very supportive to my process of dance training, and she also offered me a scholarship to stay and study with her for 1 semester at her studio, which was very generous from her, but also it really resonates with, I think, what Anna has been also offering to the community. She's been always very sensitive and aware of certain privileges that come from either class or race or gender background.
She was already in her 90s when you met her.
Yes, yes.
And I am wondering, how is it basically to kind of encounter or experience the, I don't know, her physicality, and how would you say that it's connected to her practice? I'm wondering how basically her presence embodies the practice that she does. I don't know, perhaps just a few kind of memories.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I'm currently working on a lecture for Danse Halerne and Contemporary Copenhagen, where I'm going back to all my archive that I have been collecting from the research on Anna's dance legacy. And I've been just recently looking at the videos that I have recorded during her classes. And I could see how her body has changed over these 7 years, actually, how her body is transforming from a little bit of like almost a decade, right? When I encountered her in 2011, her physicality was very different of what it is right now. And when we saw each other last time in 2017, it is amazing to see a female body who is so present. It is amazing to see how involved she always was in her teachings, how much of sincerity and also a very sharp eye she has when she's teaching, when she's observing students or other artists who are coming to share their practices or learn about her method. It is amazing that she also is dancing herself, how she is also, you know, expressing her body, her movement is incorporated in the teaching. And I was quite amazed when she, you know, back in 2011, when she was basically rolling on the floor to show one of her exercises, which was stunning. I mean, to be at that age and be able to move, to roll on the floor, you know, get access to different levels, also going through quite severe transformation. You know, she suffered from cancer back in 70s when she was diagnosed. So it's quite a long, you know, basically Anna is not only, I think, an artist or dancer, but also she is an archive that is engraved in her body throughout the entire century. And I think it's very important to remember about Anna that is quite exceptional in the history of dance, that her practice, her interest in dance is always connected to the life process she's going through, right? When we rewind a little bit to the beginning of the 50s, when she graduated from the university, when she was studying anatomy and dance, she moved to New York with her husband, and quickly she realized that it's not the environment for her. She wasn't interested in that notion of career rush, art production, competition. She moved to California, where they built this amazing foundation for the dance community. And back then in San Francisco, it's a radical shift from the east to the west coast, right? It also expresses a lot about the interest of certain artists, activists, art practitioners who are moving from the East Coast to the West Coast. It also shows of what was important for her, why there was an urge to move to the West Coast and work with the communities there. She therefore responded to certain political changes. She responded to, you know, the race riots that were happening in the 60s. She offered, you know, a variety of classes and training and laboratories for calling for a change within white community and African American community. She was taking very radical steps, and she wasn't afraid to move into the new territories of dance, but also of radical pedagogy. Later on, we witness, you know, we also could witness the whole very brave choice of working with HIV positive men in the project Positive Motion, but also with HIV positive women. This was quite an amazing, and I think it's something that we could speak about right now, because she has that interest, or she maybe is aware of where the society needs certain support. As in early age, as a Jewish kid, when she was growing up in Chicago, going to school, she experienced herself a lot of anti-Semitism, which she also talks in her biography. What it meant for a girl to be Jewish in America, what it also meant to be a granddaughter of a actively involved in Jewish practices grandfather, who was a huge you know, authority for her, because he would take her to synagogue where he would be dancing. He oftentimes is, you know, portrayed as a dancing god. So she, from very early age, had that interest in dance that was strictly connected to so-called ritual, to so-called bonding of the communities. And she takes that forward. She takes that in a radical step. She moves that notion of ritual into healing communities.
Obviously, in her biography, the fact that she was of Jewish origin, and also that the generation of her grandparents were migrants, somehow from the Ukraine, or
Yes,
as I
from the region of
understood.
Odessa, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, this somehow, I guess, informed her about certain kind of exclusiveness in the society. And I have a feeling, when you are watching the film A Breath Made Visible or read about Anna Halprin, that her somehow, that there was certain kind of empathy, that she could then approach different dance communities in San Francisco that were kind of on the edge of social acceptance, and worked with them. And I would ask you, because if we look at the history of dance, of course, let's say the first phase of modern dance was, because of how dance was produced, very much exclusive and very selective. And in the way that what she managed, obviously, to open up, and this is basically somehow this special and particular connection between art and social work, one could say, or art and life. She managed to somehow introduce dance into other kind of forms of living. Could you could you could you say something about this? The certain kind of phase when she was very much involved in the working with different minority groups, and that she introduced dance as a trajectory, medium, or agency of life there.
Yes, I think it's quite also important, and I think you also gonna track that in the movie Breath Made Visible, how you know, she's shifting her interests, and when she's also asking a very fundamental question about art. What is this for? What is this art for? What does it serve? How is it produced? How is it manifested? And what does this do? Does it change anything? And she was very much, and she still is. I mean, you know, the amazing thing about Anna is that she's 100. She just published, you know, in 2018, her newest book, which is that publication, Making Dances That Matter. She is very aware of, you know, political changes. She's very aware of certain agendas that are happening in the world. She also did this trip to Israel a few years ago when she was holding this planetary dance, the Dance for Peace, which also became quite an iconic dance practice that has spread all over the world, that is based on her, you know, understanding of scoring dances involving the personal into larger universal scale. She has a deep sensitivity. She has a deep understanding of what's going on around, and she has that urge to provide certain platform for healing. She oftentimes, you know, would talk about healing as one of the ways to go through certain challenges of our existence. She doesn't reject science, neither medicine, but she says openly that, you know, medicine can cure, but it does not heal, and the art can heal. The art can transform our traumas, and I think this is a very radical shift, you know, in the art world. Maybe these days when she was one of the artists invited to the Venice Biennale, when there was kind of like a specific curatorial interest in the works from the previous century that was addressing, you know, social justice, activism, spiritual practices. She was there, but it's quite late to acknowledge her work. I think she was, you know, breaking certain patterns in dance, in art making already back then in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, right? This is quite important to remember, that she was always ahead of time, and not always she was recognized by her work. Also, the work she has done, Parades and Changes, that toured in Europe and premiered in Sweden, I think in the mid 60s.
In 65, yeah.
And also went to Poland, and possibly, I think that's what you researched, possibly that piece was also in Croatia, was very controversial in the US itself. This was very controversial in the US since there was nudity involved. And Anna was not afraid to work with radical notions. That actually particular work has made her aware of a response of the public, and she started to be interested in some kind of participatory art, scoring performances that would have some kind of an openness for the participation of the public, which exactly in the same time, this is what you know, Jerzy Grotowski is involved in Poland, which, you know, it's like if we think of certain notions or ideas that travel across histories, she was definitely part of that. And she was about to meet Jerzy Grotowski, but unfortunately they were not they did not meet due to certain plane delays or strikes, as she also told me about that, you know, experience of coming to Poland shortly after Second World War, also of her being Jewish. This meant a lot to her. This journey has meant a lot.
Where she presented her work in Poland, you said that this was the case with Parades and Changes. This was obviously after 65. What was the occasion? Do you know?
It was a theater festival, that's for sure. I only know it from the archives that is in the Museum of Art and Design. There is few photographs, but there is very little information. Who commissioned that work? I have not found actually what was the context exactly of this festival.
Okay, well, I know that in 1963, this was 2 years before Parades and Changes, she would present her work in Zagreb Music Biennale, and it was obviously, as in the case of Parades and Changes, one open work. I mean, what you were telling before, that basically she would devise a certain kind of scores, but obviously, as far as I can understand from Parades and Changes, this would be one example of an open work. Basically, the piece that is partially, let's say, determined by a certain tasks, but open in every basically rerun. It would be changed and so on. So I'm not sure what was the title of the piece in 1963, but obviously in Zagreb, but obviously she was a great influence on Tomislav Gotovac, the then later renowned performance artists from the generation of Marina Abramovic, for example, of the time, and also Milana Broš from the CASP chamber ensemble of contemporary dance, of free dance from Zagreb. She would be very much impressed by her work, because this was one of the first examples of this kind of neo-avant-garde company, performing arts company, presented in our region of ex-Yugoslavia. This was for sure, and one of the rare, basically, occasions that we would see American contemporary dance in this phase. It would take a few decades later that some other choreographers would come to present their work here. And obviously she was also very influential on how Milana Broš, I guess, later organized her choreographies. And this was interesting thing. What perhaps we should go a little bit back. I would, because you are talking about this case of working with minority groups, these different social groups, the way she was kind of inclusive. I would ask you for your personal experience, you coming from LGBTQA plus community, and how your experience in Poland then was reflected in the, or also in, I guess, in the dance field, was reflected in the way you entered Anna's work.
Yeah. Sure. I think it could be interesting to talk about it from my personal experience of meeting her, and also not only being inspired, but I think being transformed in my thinking about what dance and performance art is. And I was very lucky to have Anna giving me time and space, not only to talk and discuss and exchange knowledge, but also to practice in the frame of her performance laboratory, which was held at her studio, where I would study and present my scores, which later on also became part of my film I have directed in San Francisco. So yes, I think this is quite an interesting turning point in my career, in my education and thinking about dance and art, since I could never really relate to what dance is, how dance is presented within the Polish context, but also maybe, let's say, contemporary context, contemporary dance, and certain trends. I come from queer identity. I come from a place where the personal and the political is quite connected. And this is also where I find Anna's work very important. I remember one of her feedback she gave me when I was presenting my score, when she said, like, listen, I'm not so much interested if you remember the steps, if you do the steps, if you count it. I'm very much interested in seeing your personal story being embodied and shared with us, with your public. This is what I want to see. And for me, this was not only a good feedback I received, but this was also like a push towards, that kind of intuition I already had about the personal being shared, about that experience of a queer body, of a body which is, expelled from her country and is looking for something else, for another space to be free. So encountering Anna was an important point through the education with her, but also later on her kind of mentoring me and also inviting me to perform at her studio. She would also follow my performances in the Bay Area in California. She would also give me a lot of time to actually look at my work on her TV in her kitchen, give feedback, see what happens with my body, how I developed over a few years. She also always very much responded to what I was busy with. I remember that critical moment when I was censored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tel Aviv, when I was invited to perform at the Festival of Performance Art in Tel Aviv, which was back then supposed to be supported by the Polish embassy, but I was censored and I was excluded from the program, and I have not been included in the Polish program. Nevertheless, I went and I performed, and then after I was actually flying directly to San Francisco to meet Anna and work in the local scene, and I have shared that story with her. She was very supportive, and we talked about that experience of censorship, the experience of rejection, the experience of not being recognized by certain political agents. And she, suggested that maybe it's time for me now to go into the transformation of this experience into a healing experience. This was very, very important for me, since the political and the personal was very much exposed in my performances. But then being with her, spending time with her, was this like, how can I look at this experience when I'm actually in the safe space, when I'm having her around, when I'm having, that possibility to look at my work from a different geopolitical situation, from a different point of view. This was very much amazing experience to have, and also an honor to be, surrounded by her wisdom and her support towards my practice. Also, what's super interesting in that research I was doing back then with her, that we would also share stories. And she has an amazing sensibility when we talk about radical pedagogy, where we talk about how she's actually observing the other body moving, feeling, expressing. She would always say that the movement, the dance, is a metaphor of what we are feeling. The dance is a metaphor of what we are going through. And she has always very much understood my queer struggle in Poland. She always did not need much explanation why my art has taken such a radical aesthetical choices, which oftentimes was a point of discussion in a Polish environment of dance and choreography. She understood that for her it was very clear why certain things look this way, why certain things are expressed in my body in this way. And I think that's amazing to have as a mentor or as a teacher and an artist who has that legacy behind her. I remember when she told me about her childhood, and she was showing me her photographs from the time when she's, you know, standing with her older brother in the woods. And she told me, you know, Vala, I was always a tomboy. I always was drawn into, you know, like kind of a masculine labor. And she kind of understood my femininity. She understood my gender identity, you know, which is exceptional for that kind of generational, you know, difference we have. But it is there. And I think her classes, her teaching, and her works were very much about that experience of not belonging, belonging, of, you know, caring, not caring, of the resistance and acceptance. You know, I think this is interesting to see also her as a teacher or as a mentor. It's important to also mark she was not one of those, you know, authoritarian male figures of theater world back from our region, as we could say in Poland or in, you know, East European context, right, where we have these very strong male characters such as Grotowski, such as Tadeusz Kantor, that are having this kind of like authoritarian, almost godlike vision of directing their troops.
What could you take us a little bit for us to imagine how, for example, a singular session with Anna Halprin in the studio functions or look like? Is it this possible to describe that all, or is it every time different? Does she, of course, has a certain kind of method of working, or is it basically just the kind of collection of responsiveness or a collection of experiences and the knowledge how to respond to the particular situation?
Mm-hmm.
So is there something fixed in her teaching or studio work, or is it something that is basically kind of learning by doing situation for you and in accordance to her response? This
Yeah,
is
yeah. Well, I think you know, she wrote so many books, and she is keeping very good track on her method, and her method is very much codified. So her classes has a very structure, right? Her classes, there is, you know, variety of classes, but I'm going to talk about two kinds of classes. One is a class which is divided into three parts, which is first you go through the anatomy of the body. You're learning about the anatomy, which I think is a deep influence of when she was studying back then at the Wisconsin University. So you learn the basic principles of your body moving. You are learning how your skeleton, how your bones, how your muscles are responding to the way you move. Anna has given up on looking for a style. She was tired of you know, Martha Graham. She always says that her body was not a good fit for that style of dance. So she was looking into the natural way of body moving, which the anatomy knowledge serves her as a basic structure for teaching. Then you move towards the improvisational part, which is how you incorporate those exercises or a certain, you know, toolbox you have into an improvisation, which oftentimes Anna is giving certain instructions or give you like an exercise that you start up with an improvisation. And then there is a last part of the session, which is the feedback, the value action, as she would say. This is where people sit and also can possibly draw or write a poetry based on what they experienced. And then it's shared with the group of people you are at the class with. This is one part. This is one side that I have experienced. The other class is the performance lab, which is dedicated to developing the notions of RSVP cycle, which she developed with the San Francisco dance workshops and Lawrence Halprin, which became the basic, you know, it's the encyclopedia of Anna's work. And this is what you study on those, you know, evenings performance classes, where you are learning how to draw a score, how to bring the score into practice, how you also share the score, so you give instructions to other dancers to perform your score. The score shall be done in a way that anybody can perform it once you are looking at the drawing. This is extremely difficult actually thing to execute, but this is, I think, the phenomena of Anna's work is that, you know, once you go through different scores, you are able to perform it in your own interpretation of what you are seeing. And I think this is how she differentiates the choreography and the scoring. Yeah, and I think that's the two things I have experienced. Besides that, of course, Anna is also running this amazing school with Daria Halprin, with her daughter, which is Tamalpa School of Expressive Arts Therapy. And I think this is like another amazing thing that kind of grew out of that dance deck in the 70s, and it was codified. It became a school. It became a profound foundation and the method of working with healing arts. And the work Daria Halprin is doing is quite amazing and brings a lot of people from all over the world to go and study there.
What would you say about, I guess, for the later kind of oeuvre or her later interest after the 1960s, things are more and more participatory in terms of what she creates, or some certain kind of situations, situations of different kind, in which basically people participate. Now, for example, what would you say if, I don't know, I mean, perhaps it's a little bit of strange question, but if you would consider spectatorship of or spectator of Anna Halprin's work, where would this spectatorship be kind of situated? Because I have a feeling that even that one of the fundamental changes in how she approached the production of dance is that basically the spectator or observer of dance is almost only possible if one experiencing it. Uh, I would say I have a feeling from what the information that I have is that somehow that dance is the first dancer is the first spectator really of what is going on in certain kind of I don't know what, in score, or because this experiential aspect of it is kind of, it's so important. What would you be your take on this thinking?
Yeah, I think maybe it's good to talk about the whole project Planetary Dance. That is about participation, and it involves community. It's based on the score of planetary dance, and it calls for participation. Anybody can perform, anybody can participate, and I think this is kind of like a happening. This is a performance that we could call a happening, that you have to involve your body in it, right? It's like there is not really a division between the artists and the participants. Everybody is running, dancing for that score. And I think that that's kind of something that we could look at as participatory arts. I think there is a difference between her time when she was doing performances on stage and then this later, happenings she was doing also as, protests on the streets, going to public space, also working with visual artists, with architects. I think it's so difficult to kind of, to talk about one thing in her work, because she was involved in so many things at the same time that it really takes a lot of time and perspectives to really give some kind of a one understanding of it. Also the interesting thing is that these things can go without her. She's kind of leaving this legacy behind. She's codifying this. She's writing books about this. She's also teaching other people how, her legacy can keep on going and how it can transform according to different social, environmental changes, right? She responds to the change of the time as well. And I think that's also one of very exceptions in the art world, where the artist is not so protective about their works. She shares that legacy. This legacy is out there and it's available to people.
And it's a kind of choreopolitical thing, I would say. It's a kind of policy of. I have a feeling in the recent year that we saw, for example, many tendencies in the field of contemporary dance that basically dance in at least one aspect of the art becomes a kind of agency of certain kind of social composition or a potential social composition, the way of living, the way of organizing life. Yes. I think, I don't know, because I'm wondering, obviously Anna Halprin is in the last 20 years, I know that the first time I've heard of her was when in the the beginning of the 90s, one book, Happenings and Other Acts, came out by Routledge. Then there is Yvonne Rainer talking with Anna Halprin as a very influential figure for postmodern dance and so on. But she's a kind of constant that in kind of growing reference. I have a feeling that as the field of contemporary dance changes or is also growing, Anna Halprin becomes more and more somehow present. Because one question that I had for you is basically, why do you think that so many dancers in the recent decades are kind of becoming aware of her work or becoming kind of very much inspired by her work? I guess also at the Cofestival we are very much inspired by her work, so that's why we had the feeling that a Breath Made Visible documentary has to be shown here and so on. So why do you think, what is that growing appetite for her work?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question that we can, also think of keeping it open and, have it ongoing also with the participants of your festival. I think this would be something interesting to ask ourselves also on a collective dimension of it, right? And I would be very happy and very, keen on having the discussion after you guys watch the movie and see what it is. I have some intuition towards that question, and maybe it comes also from my personal history of a queer body, or the queer body of resistance, since I also was running this alternative space in Krakow, which was a house where life and art was basically choreographed in the body of the house, also in the garden of the house. So, and it's also like why I was doing that. I was doing that because I was so tired of everything being centralized in Warsaw. I was so tired of a certain neoliberal modes of production, of dance, of performance, of visual arts. I was tired of the institutionalization of the art, of the codification of identities. Also, how things become tokenized by the art world. So this is one thing we can look at. There is a certain movement in our times where we are witnessing, where we are participating in some kind of a political resistance, where people become tired of certain power structures. We talk so much about decolonization of the art world. We are talking now, the Black Lives Matter is, entering the wide world. Certain things are repeating, or certain things are coming back in a different way that they were back then. Anna is 100. It's a century-old female. It's a century-old body that is an archive. So there is no surprise to me that what she was moving back then, it is moving now by a different generation of people who have maybe a different perspective on certain things, but definitely it comes from an urge for a change. We had Trump in the States. We have the second time Andrzej Duda is being elected. We have, populist right-wing, agents of power in Slovenia, in Hungary. There was a refugee and still is refugee crisis. There is the whole, trans and non-binary and queer, notion of resistance coming up to the surface. There is again a lot of things. Now we are living through the times of a pandemic. Back in the 80s, this was HIV. People were dying. Nobody knew what was happening. People were losing friends. Communities were so like desperate. There was such an extreme experience of loss that is so much entangled to a queer experience. The queer experience, the queer life is in a constant loss. And I think maybe now what we are, experiencing on a bigger scale, where a lot of thinkers, artists, curators, institutions are trying to redefine of what it is, this art. And it's again coming back to this question of Anna, what is this art for? For who this is? Who is included in the institution of the art? Who is excluded from that? And I think, now studying at the Malmo Art Academy, I'm like very, much exposed to what is happening currently in the arts. And I can look for the research on Anna's Halprin legacy, how things are valid and present.
I think at this point we have a few we are in a on time, and I would basically close this interview with your last thought. I would thank you very much. Thank you for being prepared to share your experiences and, of course, knowledge about Anna Halprin with us. And of course, I invite spectators now to see the movie A Breath Made Visible. It was made in 2009 by director Rudi Gerber. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Enjoy the movie. Le
Yeah.
posmajte in se slišimo.
Okay, bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.